Make a habit of empathy, to recognize ourselves in each other.
You know, I've learned it from both sides. When I was training as a therapist many years ago, I went to an old Jungian analyst. He's probably about the age I am now, but I was a young man and I thought he was an old guy, you know. I guess he was. And after the first session, I went home and I told my wife, I said, finally, I have found somebody who really understands me. And just that, from a personal experience point of view, was so healing. It felt so good with all the struggles I was going through at that time as a young man. I was changing professions, I had a young family, I was in graduate school, a lot of stress, and I had gone to him partly because of my training and wanting to have some analysis, but also just because I really needed somebody to help me kind of figure out my life and whether or not I was going in the right direction. And in that first session, you know, like a lot of clients probably do, I was nervous and I had it all planned out what I would say. But as I say, he heard the truth anyway. You know, he kind of saw right through all my planned presentation to him, and he zeroed right in and understood something of what was going on in my heart and spoke about that to me. And I was amazed that he had that kind of capacity to tune in so quickly, and I stayed with him about a year and a half or so, and it was one of the best, most life-changing experiences I've ever had. And at the foundation of it all, everything else, I mean, we did a lot of things in the therapy, of course, but at the foundation of it all was this sense of connection that his empathic abilities had brought about.
Was that your first really conscious sense of what empathy was?
You know, as I was in my doctoral program actually when I went into therapy with him, and I had read about empathy, and I knew, you know, intellectually up here in my head, I knew that it was very important, supposedly, according to all the books and all the research, and I had tried to practice it a little bit with classmates and how do you respond empathically like all therapist trainees do in graduate school, but I had never experienced it. I had never been with somebody who was so astute, so clinically sensitive that he was able to listen very carefully. And then after he let me say whatever I needed to say, he would then very gently come in and say, well, if I'm understanding you correctly, this is what you're saying and this is what you're feeling. And you know, it just touched my heart. I felt safe. I felt like he understands. I don't know if he's been there or not, but if he hasn't, he still knows the terrain of my own heart. And I think that's what empathy is. It's the ability to tune into another so thoroughly that you begin to sense what the terrain of their heart is really about. And by the way, I think the terrain of the deeper heart of the other is not that different from the terrain of our own hearts and souls. In fact, that sense of connection at that deeper level, I believe, is also one of the ways to think about empathic connection. One thing, by the way, that I think is very important while we're talking about this real directly and therapeutically, it's very easy for beginning therapists and people who start learning how to be empathic and working on their empathic skills. It's easy to get into the technique part of that, like, oh, empathy is saying back to a person what they've said and trying to, and you can get into a technique phase of that. And perhaps that's necessary in the beginning when you're learning to be more sensitive in how to do these things. But I've trained therapists for 25 years, and I've seen that sort of mechanic or mechanistic phase. You do the technique. And as I tell my students, that's okay to start there, but that's not really what empathy is. That's perhaps one of the tools that we use to learn how to do it, but empathy is almost a mystical kind of thing in my view. It's like real empathy is when all the techniques and all the structures begin to fall away and one is really truly connected to the other. That's what real empathy is. And we can do all the techniques right, but if they don't get that heart-to-heart connection where the other feels understood and where we know we're in contact with his or her inner world and inner terrain, then we've missed the boat, no matter how competent and professional we look like we are. So that's the goal, to make that real deeper level contact.